Welcome back to the Bradman Word, and we are continuing on with the life of Daniel, but also his visions as well. And today we are going to look at the 70 weeks, which we will get to in just a second. But first, I want to just kind of give a preview to Thursday. We are going to take a little break, and we are going to look at the medical and the physical just background to the crucifixion, everything that Jesus went through, his flogging, the crown of thorns, everything. We're going to take a little glance at that. And I think by doing so, it's going to make us look at Jesus' sacrifice in just a remarkable way. I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong. I think we definitely understand the sacrifice that Jesus made. But when you look at the medical aspects, the physical trauma that Jesus went through, it just makes you go, wow. And so, with that, we will get to that on Thursday. But today, we are going to dive into the next vision of Daniel, which is all about these 70 weeks, which for me, I think it is all about the timing of God. Whether it is within our prayer life or things to come, I think it is all about the timing of God and His perfect timing or His sovereignty. So, with that being said, turn with me to Daniel chapter 9. We are going to be ending the chapters, so verses 20 through 27. This comes right on the heels of that beautiful prayer that Daniel gives in the first part of chapter 9, in verses 1 through 19, where he is praying for and on behalf of his people and confessing their sin of idolatry. The angel Gabriel shows back up and not only comforts him, but also tells him about the 70 weeks that are to come. And so let's dive into that. We'll start at verse 20. Daniel chapter 9, verse 20. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God. This is most likely talking about the hill that the temple was on in Jerusalem. Verse 21. While I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. So, there are a couple things here. First, when it's talking about describing Gabriel as a man in the middle of verse 21, there, it's again just personifying a angelic being. So, it is a being that looks like a man. It's not talking about, for instance, like Gabriel was an angel and now is a man, but then he'll be an angel again in the future. I don't think that's what it's getting at. I think Daniel is trying to describe to us what Gabriel looked like, and so I think that's what we're getting at there. And then I think at the end there, it's really interesting in verse 23. I think the 70 weeks is, yes, it's getting to the future, but it's also trying to show Daniel that even with the sin of idolatry that Israel has in its history, God has not forgotten them. He will see those who believe in him, he will see them through. I think that's beautiful to see. And it also reminds us, too, as we're about to get into the 70 weeks, which is very debatable, very hard to understand. I think it's a great reminder for us that when we're talking about biblical prophecy, again, yes, we are talking about future things, but we're mainly talking about, okay, what can I learn about the Lord? What can I learn from the Lord when it comes to these prophecies? It's not just about, oh, who's this? Or what is that? Or what is this talking about? It's not just about that. So for me, this 70 weeks thing is all about the sovereignty of God when it comes to his timing, but it's also the fact that God does not give up on his people, even for long periods of time where it seems like the other side is winning, where the enemy, Satan, is winning. I think that is crystal clear and really important that we look at that when it comes to biblical prophecy. So let's look at these 70 weeks. 70 weeks are decreed, this is verse 24, about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again, with squares and moats, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off, and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So, let's talk about this. This is very debatable and it's really hard to understand. Honestly, there's so much here that just being honest, I quite don't understand it myself, just being honest. But that's where you get commentaries involved. Here, I honestly would look to the Christ Centered Exposition Commentary Series. The one going over Daniel is written by Daniel Aiken. The editors of this series are David Platt, Daniel Aiken, and Tony Merida. This one was specifically written in the year 2017. I just want to make sure I don't plagiarize here. But on page 121 of this book, it gives you 4 views about these 70 weeks that I think are really, really important. When we're talking about weeks here, too, it's not actual 7-day periods of time. It could be, but I don't think so. I think here it's more actually talking about 77s or a group of sevens, and it really could be referring to periods of time, to years. I don't think actual 7-day week is actually being talked about here. But of course, when we're talking about 7, it's talking about completeness as well when it comes to how 7 is used in Scripture. So, with that, I'm going to read you just a little bit of page 121 of this book and just the views that are on here. View 1. The 77s are literal years that run from either 605 or 486 BC. 605, the start of the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, or 586 BC, the fall of Jerusalem, to the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, 167 to 164 BC. The dates, however, simply don't work, and this view doesn't fit well with what Daniel 9:24 through 27 actually says. View 2. The 77s are symbolic periods of time culminating in the 1st century AD. This view also struggles with dates and the content of the prophecy. View 3. The 77s are symbolic periods of time ending with the second coming of Christ. And then view 4, the 77s are literal years that end with Christ's second coming, but also include his first coming. And there is an important prophetic gap between the 69th and 70th week. The first 69 weeks are now past. The climactic 70th week is still future. And I think that this is, for me personally, and Daniel Aiken, the author of this book, I think this one makes the most sense. There is 69 weeks, and then the 70th week is still to come. He goes on to talk about from Stephen Miller, he gives a great, just kind of fleshing out of this fourth view. The first seven sevens, or 49 years, commence with a command to rebuild Jerusalem, either the decree to Ezra in 458 BC or the decree to Nehemiah in 445 BC, and terminate with the completion of the work of Ezra and Nehemiah about 49 years later in about 409 or about 396 BC. The next 62 sevens, or 434 years, extend from the end of the first group of sevens to Jesus Christ's first coming, either his baptism in about 626 AD, or Christ presenting of himself to the people as Messiah on Palm Sunday in 32 or 33 AD. So, there's a couple things to think about here. When we're talking about these, this is why I think this one makes the most sense. Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. I think this is talking about that 49 years where you have the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. This prince that's talked about here, it could be referencing to the first 7 weeks added to the next 62 sevens, which would then be prophesying Jesus. You could also be seeing this prince as King Artaxerxes, or the king that sends Nehemiah to rebuild Jerusalem. Artaxerxes the First, I believe, is the one that we are seeing there, again, from this book. But I think the 62 sevens, continuing verse 25, then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. So you're talking about the troubled time of the rebuilding of Jerusalem with Nehemiah, but you could also be referencing to the intertestamental period, the Maccabean revolt from Antiochus Epiphanes to the emergence of the Roman Empire, which then oversees Israel during the time of Jesus. So you could be talking about that. Verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, or at this point the 63 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. I think that is very much talking about the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. I think this is referencing to the Roman destruction of the city of Jerusalem and its temple. Titus, General Titus, it could be the one that is being talked about there as well. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war, desolations are decreed. The flood being talked about here, it could be talking about the destruction of the waterways of Jerusalem in 70 AD, causing a flood. It could also be just a figurative language talking about the many wars, the flood of wars that are coming until this last week in verse 27. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. I think that is definitely referencing to the Antichrist. I think it's too late for Antiochus Epiphanes, so I think it has to be talking about the Antichrist. But even then, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. There will be a time where the Antichrist appears to be a sound person, where he possibly rebuilds the temple, which then it makes sense because after the first half of the week, he puts an end to the sacrifice and offering. Well, what sacrifice and offering? I think it's talking about the return of the temple to Jerusalem. And then after about 3.5 years, that will end. And then that will usher that last 3.5 years, which are awful, a great time of desolation until the desolator, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, which I think is the end of the tribulation, the start of the millennium, and then, of course, the final battle with Satan after the millennium, which is talked about in at the end of the book of Revelation. But here, with the 70 weeks, you can take all of that, which is again very debatable and it's very hard to understand, but again, I think the point, though, is about the timing of the Lord and the fact that He is sovereign in His timing. So, for you and I, whether it is in our prayer life, whether we are just struggling with a time where we are being tempted, or we have somebody that we deeply care about that is going through a very hard time themselves, we want those things to end right then and there. According to our timing. And that's not always the case. But that doesn't mean that God isn't faithful. It doesn't mean that God won't show up for you. It just means that that point in time, whatever is going on, His will in that time for that situation is not meant to be at that time that you want. Again, that doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. It doesn't mean that God won't step in. It just means that He is doing so according to His timing and according to His will, which is so much better than what you and I could come up with. And I think that's what these 70 weeks show. Yes, there's this long period of time between the 69th week, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, to this 70th week, which is the Great Tribulation. And we are in this church age right now, waiting for that 70th week to come. Yes, that is a long amount of time. We don't know how much that's going to be. But I think for us is the fact that this is a great opportunity for us being in the church age to spread the gospel as much as we can, knowing that that great tribulation is coming. And when that does come, that will spell the real end of the end. And so we should, in earnest, be proclaiming the gospel to those around us. I think that's what the 70 weeks is all about. Yes, it's fun to look at the actual times and splitting up the weeks and what does this mean and who is this and who is the desolator, and which again I think is the Antichrist, but who is that? I think we could go and just spend so much time getting lost about the details of the 70 weeks that we don't take the time to understand that is about the sovereignty of God and that He is sovereign in all of the details that are going on, and that He, even in the midst of all of our sin, which we should confess, which Daniel does in chapter 9, verses 1 through 19, even with all of that going on, God will see you and I as followers of Him to the end, even though we let Him down. And that is what a beautiful picture that is. And so, with that, we are going to take again a one-time break as we look at the physical and the medical just significance of the crucifixion on Thursday. So I will see you then, and then we'll come back to Daniel's visions in Daniel 10 the week after the week next week. Yeah. So with that, thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today as we looked at the 70 weeks and the importance of the timing of God. Thanks.